Grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's family history show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. And speaking of which, if you've been watching Netflix lately, you may have seen a new film up there, a documentary called Our Father. And it has to do with fertility fraud. And it's a very disturbing show. I'll just say that right up front as a little bit of a warning. It's about a doctor in Indianapolis who so far is known to have fathered 94 children. Yeah. And we're going to talk to the DNA detective CeCe Moore about this because this guy is not the only one. In fact, there are at least 44 others that are publicly known, 44 fertility doctors, and she says there are many more than that. You're going to want to hear what CeCe has to say coming up in about 10 minutes or so. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, may I invite you to do so once again. You get a blog from me. It's free. You get links to past and present shows each week. It's free. And you get links to great stories you'll appreciate as a family historian. Right now, it's time to head out to Boston. David Allen Lambert is standing by, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing okay. It's a belated wish from me to you. Happy Father's Day, Fish.
Hey, thank you.
But you know the first one was started 112 years ago in Washington State?
I had no idea.
Yeah, it was proposed by Sonora Smart Dodd. Her dad was a Civil War veteran, and he raised her as a single father. So she loved her father so much, she started a holiday that, well, you and I and millions of others can be grateful for. So thank you, Sonora, for all the cards that I've received in the past 20-odd years now.
And I hope you had a great day too, Dave.
I surely did. You know, I love when I meet people at NEHGS. Well, I had a gentleman come in. He's 94 years young this year, and he was telling me about his life story, that he's attended Fenway Park for 89 years with the Red Sox. So obviously he's seen a lot more years they lost than won. But he told me, when I asked him, I said, you must have seen Ted Williams play baseball. And he says, son, I saw Babe Ruth play baseball. 1935, the last year that Babe Ruth played professional ball, was not with the Yankees. Most of your listeners are probably saying, huh? Boston Braves. And That is the year, and he was 7 years old and fondly remembers seeing him play. So,
unbelievable.
Hey,
wow.
Can't be many people alive today that saw Babe Ruth play baseball.
No.
Well, you know, I love stories about DNA, but for the descendants of people that were in World War II, our boys may have not been buried in the right graves. DNA is now saying that some of these individuals may have not been the ones that were brought home with that name attached to them.
Ooh. And this is because DNA is showing they're now actually finding these people in other graves on the other side of the pond. Unbelievable.
Well, you know, one of the things I think with DNA, it also brings together living people. And the story in the Washington Post about Michelle Dugan, who found her sister and now runs a business with her in Las Vegas, is amazing. Just goes to show you, you can find people late in life and still start that family business.
Yeah, actually, she's a real estate agent, and so she and her sister got into business together. It's called Sisters Selling Vegas, and she trained her newly discovered sister in all the aspects of the business, and they're just having a great time working together and getting to know one another.
That's great. I love when a DNA story has a happy ending.
Right?
Well, you know, speaking of siblings, two brothers actually have worked together in recent years, and they actually located a shipwreck. Now, this shipwreck was from 340 years ago. Now, off the coast of Norfolk, England, the Gloucester, when it wrecked, was carrying the future King of England, James II. And it also had a near relative of George Washington on board. Now, many people died on this vessel, and they're finding, besides the cannons, they found clothing that's actually in the wreck that's mixed up with everything else that went down. It's still been preserved after over 340 years.
That's unbelievable.
And they're saying this is probably the most valuable shipwreck since the Mary Rose was found back in 1982, which was Henry VIII's warship. Well, my next story will give you the hiccups. Well, it gave one guy the hiccups who died back in 1991. This gentleman by the name of Charlie Osborne experienced over 20 to 40 involuntary diaphragm spasms per minute. In total, in the course of his life, it's estimated he gave 430 million hiccups before his death at the age of 97 in 1991.
Wow, that is unbelievable. And you got to wonder how he could live so long with all that stress on his body.
In Smithsonian Magazine, this story is actively in the news because this is the anniversary of his accident in June of 1922 when his hiccuping began nonstop.
Really? What kind of accident did he have?
It was kind of a freak accident. He was hanging a 350-pound hog for butchering. I picked it up and then I fell down. I felt nothing, but the doctor later said I busted a blood vessel the size of a pin in my brain. And that destroyed a small part of his brain, which controls the part that inhibits the hiccup response.
So there's nothing they could do for him.
Not in 1922.
No, but not even in 1960 or 70 or 80. Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing. Going full hog, it caused him to be a hiccuper for the rest of his life. You know, it's what a shame.
Well, as they say, everybody has a story, and that's what we're out looking for. So this guy certainly had one.
Well, that's about all I have for this week for us from Beantown this week. And don't forget, if you're not a member of AmericanAncestors.org, you can save $20 with a coupon code EXTREME. You may have heard of it on AmericanAncestors.org. Catch you a little bit for Ask Us Anything.
All right, Dave, thanks so much. And coming up next, have you been watching Netflix lately? There's an amazing movie out called Our Father. It's about a fertility doctor in Indianapolis who has been found to have, so far, 94 biological children through fertility fraud. And coming up next, we're going to talk to CeCe Moore, the DNA detective, about this issue that she's been on top of actually for a long, long time. And she says there are far more doctors than the 45 that were mentioned in the documentary. You're going to want to hear some of the complications of this whole thing coming up when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Genies, 10 years ago, in April of 2012, when the government released the 1940 census, it took Ancestry several months to complete and review an accurate index. Fast forward to today. Using proprietary handwriting reading software, it took Ancestry only 9 days to get the job done with the 1950 census. Now, they held back results for a time for actual humans to review what the software had created. And after just a few weeks, it became obvious the software was near perfect, and the computer-generated index to 153,000 names has been released. What does this mean in your journey to research your family? It means you can search the entire database quickly and easily for your family members. Never has a U.S. Census Index been created as quickly as this. Go to Ancestry.com today, click on the 1950 census on the homepage, and see what you can discover. Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, back at it on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And just 10, 15 years ago, we began this whole journey with DNA. And in the last 10 years or so, we've had an incredible tsunami of DNA test results coming online, through which all kinds of family secrets, recent and distant past, have come forward. And nobody has found more of them than my next guest, my good friend CeCe Moore. She's with Parabon, which helps solve all kinds of cold cases around the country. You're up to, what, 220-something right now, CeCe?
Yeah, those are the ones that are confirmed, yes.
Yeah, and more to go, and you're averaging like one a week. It's insane. But I wanted to talk to you today about this new Netflix movie that's out. I watched it the other night, and frankly, I found it really disturbing. It's called Our Father. It's about a doctor in Indianapolis named Donald Klein. And it's about fertility fraud. And through this tsunami of DNA test results, 94 individuals have discovered that they are his child as a result of him substituting out his genetic material for that which was promised to women who are looking to get help in getting pregnant. And you've been in this even long before you were dealing with the criminal cases. Let's talk about this. How common is this turning out to be as a result of DNA testing today?
Well, it became clear several years ago that this was actually a common occurrence, that many donor-conceived individuals are actually the biological children of the fertility doctor. And so it became so common that years ago, when someone who was donor-conceived came to me and wanted to learn who their biological father was, the very first thing I did was ask who the doctor was and build his tree and compare it against their matches. And so it has been something we've been aware of for many years through our DNA detective work, and I knew that this was at some point going to explode in a big scandal. We're finally seeing that happen, where the public is learning about this. But DNA consumer testing really exposed this a decade ago.
Yeah,
and
it exposed so much. It's just absolutely amazing, the different things. We've got the crime stuff. We've got this now. And, of course, other things just within individual families. You say there are many, and I know at the end of this Netflix show, they said there that 44 other doctors have now been identified as providing genetic material to their patients. So that's a total of 45 that's public. I'm sure there are many others. And when you see that there are 94 identified children to this Dr. Donald Klein, you recognize that's really got to be just a percentage of the people he fathered, because not everybody's going to take a DNA test.
Right, exactly. So there's many more than 45 doctors around the world that have been revealed as having done this. Those are just the ones that the filmmakers knew about. I know of many, many more, and it's not just in the United States. So this was a practice that was happening worldwide, which is shocking. And it says to me that this was being taught or discussed. This couldn't have all happened spontaneously in these doctors' offices. Somebody was teaching, or I don't know if it was association or if it was a medical school or what, but somehow this was being promoted as a way to do this type of work, to perhaps save money, make a profit. And it's incredibly sad. And I think that a lot of these doctors felt that they had good genes, right? They were doing a favor to women and maybe the world by spreading their seed, which is really sickening. But I do think there was a lot of that there. And we've even heard that from some of the doctors that we have identified through our work. There's some crazy stories about them being confronted and the type of reactions they have. And they think, well, they're smart, right? They're successful. Yep. They come from good genes. Why not spread it around? But there's always this big concern that half siblings could meet each other, have that genetic sexual attraction that science has proven exists. You know, when siblings don't grow up together, they may recognize some sort of bond with each other and not know that it's because they're actually closely related. And then as time goes on, this becomes exponentially more dangerous because if there's all these half siblings and then they have children, well, then we've got half first cousins, right?
Right.
Don't know they're related. And it just goes on and on and on to where we may have people who are conceiving children together that have close relationships and don't know it. So that's certainly one of the very good things about consumer DNA testing. As I always say, Pandora has come out of the box through this type of testing and genetic genealogy, but it could also save some people from having children with real genetic issues because they're not aware that they have these close relationships. But it's obviously something these doctors didn't consider. But if you've got 94 known children out there, well, okay, about 20% of the public in the U.S. has tested, maybe a higher percent of donor-conceived individuals. But still, we know that there's going to be a lot more children out there.
Hundreds.
That are undiscovered. And we just keep seeing them come in, you know. So when we do this work, we make sure that at least one sibling is in each of the databases.
Yep.
And then it's just a matter of time. With the original fertility fraud case that first came out through consumer DNA testing, which was the one I was involved with, the Thomas Lippert case, that case, we just keep seeing more and more and more children of Thomas Lippert.
Wow. How many? What's the number up to now, CeCe?
You know, I haven't counted recently. I think last I looked, it was like 35. So, you know, not rivaling Klein yet.
Right.
But I do believe there are still many, many more out there, and still many of them are young.
Sure.
And may not have taken the time or have the money to take these tests. So I expect there's at least 100. But, you know, he was sending his biological material to other states even. And so
oh, my gosh.
I think I've always believed he has hundreds of biological children out there, and I'm sure that he does.
Now, in the Klein case, they were talking about the children, these half-siblings, they have autoimmune issues that apparently came down through his side.
Well, the same clinic that Thomas Lippert was working at has had some issues as well, where they were using donors that were older. And some of those children also have some genetic issues. And that hasn't gone public, but I've seen that myself. And so when there is a totally unregulated industry, such as the fertility industry, there's just no way to know what they're doing behind closed doors. And they never could have imagined that consumer DNA testing was going to bring all of this to light.
Right.
And so we're seeing all kinds of terribly unethical, unprofessional activities or behaviors that were happening in these fertility clinics and really in the industry as a whole. I mean, it's really scary, and I feel really badly for anybody that is in a position where they need to consider fertility treatment, because I think it's really hard to trust that they're behaving ethically, and there needs to be some type of federal regulation.
Absolutely. You know, this is the thing that the people who are deeply involved in this case really tried to get him charged with a crime, Dr. Klein. And the legal people were saying, well, really, there isn't anything we can charge him with because there's nothing on the books that deals with this kind of thing. Now, since then, Indiana, where he's based, has come up with a law to deal with it. But of course, it's not going to impact this guy. This guy wound up with a $500 fine and a slap on the wrist, basically a suspended minimal sentence for having falsified statements, answering questions with the Attorney General's office for the state of Indiana. That was it. They couldn't go after him for anything else. And so you're absolutely right. We do have to deal with a national law to cover this whole thing, and hopefully in other countries as well.
I think it's fallen largely to the biological children from these cases to try to get these laws passed. I know Eve Wiley, who is a daughter of a doctor as well, and it's a very similar type case to Donald Klein's, has advocated and actually been successful in getting a law passed in Texas. I think that was the first state that passed a law considering this type of behavior as a type of sexual assault.
Yes.
And so it shouldn't fall to them, right? We should all be up in arms, not just the biological children of these individuals. We should all be saying, look, when you've got an industry that is dealing with such sensitive portions of someone's life, I mean, your entire being, right? Your entire identity in life is involved in this. There has to be regulation. We cannot rely on them to self-regulate. We see what happens, right? This is what self-regulation led to in this type of industry. And I'm not a big pro-regulation person, but something has to be done here. I'm hoping, just seeing that this is coming out, that people are getting caught, not just like in cold cases in violent criminals, but people's other types of very unethical behaviors are coming out through DNA testing, that it will help some of this to stop, just because they know they can't get away with it anymore.
And not forever. That's the other thing, you know.
There must be so many people across this country and across the world that are just shaking in their boots, right? Because they know they did something that is eventually going to be revealed through genetic genealogy, whether it committed a violent crime, abandoned baby that died, or they perpetrated something like this. Someone in power took advantage of someone like these doctors.
And I wanted to ask you, CeCe, are you aware of any of these doctors who have been revealed? Are any of them still in business?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Really?
They are. And a number of them don't think they did anything wrong. That's the reaction. And so that's why I've been really coming to the conclusion that this was a known practice within their field, at least, you know, among the doctors themselves. This was an accepted, known, maybe even encouraged practice, because many of them still don't see that they did anything wrong. Now, with someone like Dr. Klein, he didn't get the punishment that he deserved, but, I mean, his career is ruined. His life is probably pretty much ruined. He's been completely shamed and shown to the world what he's really like. And so we have to take some solace in that.
She is CeCe Moore. She's the DNA detective. CeCe, let's take a break and talk more about this when we return here in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, I'm back talking to my good friend CeCe Moore, the DNA detective on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. We're talking about fertility fraud right now because there's a new Netflix movie out there that you may find very disturbing, as I did when I watched it. It's called Our Father. It's about an Indianapolis fertility doctor, Dr. Donald Klein, who has been shown through genetic genealogy to have fathered 94 known children at this point by using his own biological samples instead of providing those that were actually promised to the women he was supposedly helping. He had promised them that they would get various samples based on what kind of talents or looks that they wanted their child to have. But as we found out, of course, as a result of the tsunami in DNA, this man provided his own samples, and so he has 94 kids that are known right now, but there are probably many, many more because they haven't all tested. CeCe, you were speculating in our last segment that this may be something that is actually taught within the field because there are right now 45 publicly known doctors who have been accused of this. What could be the motives here, do you think?
Well, one is obviously profit, right? If they don't have to pay for a donor, they're saving money every time they perform this procedure. But I do also think that sometimes it involves some type of narcissism, that these doctors believe that they are superior beings, right? They're smarter, they're accomplished, they're successful. I think doctors are often treated almost godlike in our society, or have been historically, and so maybe they believe that they're actually doing something good for the world, that spreading their seed is going to improve humankind, you know, which is really scary and kind of disgusting to think about. But I think it is something we have to consider as a possible reason that some of these doctors did this, because it's many more than 45.
Sure. There's a 45 we know of at this point. I mean, that are publicly.
Yeah. Right. But I know of many, many more
Sure.
than that. And so you would like to think that this is a one-off, right? This is such a horrible story, and people will make themselves feel better by thinking, oh, it doesn't happen a lot. But it's not. This is actually more the trend. This is not the exception. This seems to be more the rule in the industry that this was being done. I'm not saying all donor-conceived people are the children of their fertility doctors, but there are many, many out there that are.
And it's such a challenging thing for some of the children that find out later that their dad, who was thought to be the donor, wasn't their dad. And you've dealt with this many times. I dealt with it once with a friend who I had to tell her father wasn't her father. It's devastating. And the pain goes on and lingers for perhaps a lifetime, knowing that the man you loved or that loved you so much is not your biological father.
Well, and then the flip side is this man that you think did this terrible thing is half of your genetic material.
Yeah.
You have half your DNA from this doctor. And then many of these doctors are very successful and accomplished and intelligent. And so what a strange dichotomy that must be for the biological children. You think, okay, this is an outstanding person and I've got their DNA, but then it's also a very unethical person who made this decision to do this. And I just can't imagine what that must feel like. I mean, for those of us that are really focused on DNA and genetic inheritance, it's such a strange question. And I think it is similar to what we look at whenever we find someone in our family tree that maybe wasn't such a great person. When people find, say, slave owner in their family tree, it's not about that one person, right? You can still build your family tree, your genetic family tree, and appreciate your ancestors. You know, maybe you just sort of skip over that generation, that one person that was found to do something pretty awful. So I do hope that the biological children of these doctors are still able to appreciate their genetic heritage on their paternal side and still get joy from tracing their genealogy, since, you know, we love that. We would hate for somebody to not be able to get joy from that. But it must be such a challenge to navigate. You're
right about that. And the dichotomy of feelings is what I've seen in people. And one of them is this idea that, wait a minute now, you went in and you violated my father, for instance, in a situation of somebody having an affair with the mother, right? And so now they hate this person who brought them life, and they feel a distance from the person who raised them because of the fact now they have this genetic material, which really doesn't define who you are. The other challenge that's interesting to me in this for people who get discoveries like this is something that happened before they were even born, right? I mean, it was 9 months plus before they were born. And nothing in their life has changed, right? The dad who raised them was still dad. All the memories they had were still the same. Nothing was different throughout their lives. They met the person they fell in love with and had kids with, maybe grandkids. And yet everything is different now because of this DNA test result.
Right. There are literally millions of people who have made these types of discoveries now. Because if you think about it, about 40 million people have tested across the different companies.
Wow.
And about 10% at least are known to have unexpected surprises that are pretty significant. And so think about that. You know, maybe 4 million people have found out that their father or grandfather was not their biological ancestor. And that's significant. And a lot of people have said it's absolutely life-changing for them. So consumer DNA testing has just brought to light so many secrets. Being on the cutting edge of that from the very beginning has been a real lesson in human nature and our society and what has been going on behind closed doors and the types of decisions people made thinking that nobody would ever know. It's really revealing and enlightening, and not in a positive way, unfortunately.
Right. Isn't that interesting? You know, you think about they'll never know, and yet we can reveal something that happened 150 years ago or even longer in some cases as a result of this. I mean, we're talking about maybe even as far back as the 18th century pulling out secrets. Isn't that incredible that we can do this now?
It is. It's really incredible. And it's so much relied on getting that critical mass, getting these huge databases and people who know their family trees, of course, to be able to help those who don't. But often when I'm working in trees, I make discoveries about people's families way back even that I don't think anyone even knows yet. I think, I wish I could share this with all the descendants. I'll see that there's been this long disagreement about who the father was in a case or who the parents were even 100, 200 years ago. And I can see the answer very clearly through the DNA. And it can be resolved. So I believe there are thousands of brick walls and debated ancestral lines that can be resolved. Even going back 200 years, going way back in our trees, the answer is there in those DNA databases if someone puts in the work to do it.
My question to you is, how many more people do you think are going to test over the coming decade?
You know, that's such a good question. I always feel like maybe we've kind of hit saturation, right? When we saw that huge upswing in 2015, 16, 17, where the databases were just doubling and doubling and doubling, and it was incredible. And then around the time the Golden State Killer suspect was identified and arrested, things started slowing down, and some blamed law enforcement for that. So I was really thinking we'd hit that saturation, but there's been a couple surveys recently done that make it appear there are still a lot of people out there that would take a test if they were given one for free.
Interesting.
And so I think there still are quite a few people that will test. I think we will see millions more, and I really wasn't convinced of that until pretty recently.
She's CeCe Moore. She's the DNA detective. CeCe, always a joy to have you on the show, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you as always.
David Allen Lambert is coming up next to join me for another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey Genies, Ancestry now has an exclusive partnership with PhotoMine, the leader in photo scanning and archiving. What does this mean to you? Well, imagine inheriting an old photo album and you want to digitize all the images. Up until now, you'd have to remove the pictures, place them in a scanner, crop them, and perhaps use Photoshop to improve them. Now, by using these amazing PhotoMine tools from Ancestry, you can use your phone to take a picture of an entire page from your album. The tools will automatically separate and crop each picture, improve focus, and restore color or colorize your images. Then you can assign which picture goes to which person on your tree. If you've been waiting years to get around to the tedious project of scanning your old albums, it's been worth the wait. No more pulling your photo albums apart and trying to reinsert the pictures back in proper order. No more tearing of your old photos while removing them from those so-called magnetic albums of the 1970s. Sign in to Ancestry through their mobile app to try it out. Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at ExtremeGenes.com.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. and when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from. Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
All right, welcome back to America's Family History Show. It's Extreme Genes. It's time for Ask Us Anything, where we answer listener questions. David is back on from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Dave, first question from Anne Marie in Farmington, Connecticut. She says, guys, I found that my recently passed uncle had a collection of coffin plates. Coffin plates. What do I do with these? I don't know if these belong to family or if he bought them. Where do I go with this? Anne Marie.
Well, Anne Marie, I would say you're going to become a genealogist real quick because they could be near relatives. Unless some of the surnames make no sense, it is entirely possible he had a macabre collecting interest. I have 2 coffin plates in my collection.
Really? No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah. Now, weren't these coffin plates? Didn't they put them on the coffin and they stay on the coffin and then they're buried with it? Isn't that how that works?
In some cases, that was the case, but some of them were on there temporarily and then removed before the burial and given as a sort of memento to the family. I have my great-grandmother's from 1922, and I also have my dad's kid sister who was only 10 years old who died in 1930. And I don't have a photograph of her, so this is the only memento I have of my dad's little sister who died as a kid.
So are you telling me then basically that maybe they use these things to mark the coffin so they wouldn't get mixed up with somebody else?
Well, that could be partly it. Some of them were buried with the casket plate on there because I've seen, like, when they've done excavations and tombs and churches and whatnot, they find a casket plate or coffin plate still on the cover, or maybe they find it in the grave when the casket's rotted away and they found the coffin plate. Now, it's a little bit macabre, but it is a genealogical memento, if you will. Sure. At least for my family, that's all I have that belonged to a great-grandmother, well, at least post her life. So the funny thing about it is there is a whole market for these. In fact, on eBay right now, there are over 1,300 coffin plates or so. Yes, there are, sir.
Really? I've never heard of this.
I'm looking at one right now for $130, a coffin plate for someone who died in 1876. Another one from 1874, father and son, pre-1900 one for $249. So, you know, there's a market for everything. And at least one thing in genealogy, when we try to return it to its rightful place, please do not go and drop these into the ground by where the person's buried. They weren't stolen. They would have been removed legally by the undertaker or the family at that time. But the family might be interested in it.
Sure.
If, in fact, you have some that are not in your family tree. I had about 3 of them that I bought when I was a kid because I was that strange little kid at the yard sales, and I bought 3 of them, and my daughter was cleaning out a closet, and they fell out, and she goes, "Dad, what are these?" And I'm like, "These are coffin plates." And she's like, "Why do you have them?" "I don't want them in the house." I said, "Well, I do have 2 that are your relatives." She goes, "That's fine, but get rid of these. They really freak me out." And I'm like, okay. So what did I do? I gave them to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and now they're in their collection.
That's a great thing to do, but she's right. It is rather macabre, isn't it?
It really is. You know, I probably saw them as a curiosity as I was a kid, and I probably paid a few dollars a piece. They're often silver plated.
Yeah.
So there is some value to them. But as far as like our friend Anne Marie who has that question, do some genealogy, you know, start a tree on Ancestry.com or something like that, plug in these names. And if they geographically don't make any sense, it is possible that your relative bought them as an interesting souvenir.
Sure.
And maybe you can find the family member who has a tree online and say, "By the way, I happen to have your great-great-grandmother's coffin plate. You interested?" I know that if someone contacted me, I would put my hands up and say, why not? You know?
All right. Wow. Interesting question. Thanks so much for it, Anne Marie. Hey, we got another listener question coming up next when we return on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. And thus we return on America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. I'm Fish. That's Dave. This is Ask Us Anything, where we answer your listener questions. And Dave, this one comes from Lance in Mesa, Arizona. Says, Fisher and Dave, if you found out that your late great-grandmother had had a child that she gave up, how would you approach her 94-year-old daughter for more information? Lance, that's an interesting one. That, it makes you think of a couple of things. First of all, does the 94-year-old really know about it? What is the disposition of this 94-year-old? Is she a really open person? Is she sharp? How's her memory? I guess the thing I would think, Dave, is you really have to do a lot more research before you really even ask her anything, don't you think?
That's very true, because you don't know at that age if there are already memory issues that she has, or she has health issues. I mean, you don't want to give the poor person a stroke or a heart attack.
Right.
And even that is the case if you find out that your ancestor is the sibling of an older person and may have been put up for adoption. That same thing is true.
It's funny you say that, because I do have a friend, and we recently figured out through DNA that her mother, who's dealing with memory issues right now, had a half-sister that she knew nothing of. And the mom is having so many problems with her health right now and her memory that when she was presented with this, she didn't even want to meet her. She said, I've got so much on my plate. She had also lost a son. And she says, I just can't deal with that anymore. So you have to kind of consider the emotional state of the person you're approaching and what their circumstances are, because you don't want to, like you say, jeopardize their health as a result of the shock, right?
Exactly. Well, it's interesting. I had a similar thing happen about 20 years ago. My wife's grandmother was adopted, and I, through research, not DNA, tracked down her natural mother, and I found that she actually had a family and got married after she put up my wife's grandmother for adoption. The woman lived until her 90s in 1988. In fact, we could have had her at our wedding. She had lived that long. But her grandmother never knew who her mother was. Her grandmother had had a stroke, and one of the people I contacted, I must meet her, blah, blah, blah. And, I want to get photos with her. And we're like, no. And she was in a nursing home, so she couldn't have been found. And we just kind of left it at that. It was nice enough to know that the other family existed, but we weren't going to disrupt Anne's grandmother, who was in poor health.
Yeah, but there are other routes that you can go in your research, including digitized newspapers and trying to follow the life of the person that you connected with. But to get the story straight from a daughter might be really challenging.
Very true. I think that is really one of the things you have to approach with DNA. I mean, it's like, even if you're not dealing with an elderly person, you're dealing with any living person, there are going to be emotions associated with it, especially if you find a birth parent or a half-sibling that you didn't know about, as was the case with me. It was a rush of emotions to find out that I had a half-sibling.
Yeah, I bet.
My whole life.
And I'm sure it was for her as well to find you. Mm-hmm. I had a good friend, and I was able to introduce her to a half-sister as well through some DNA research. And it took that half-sister a while to warm up to the whole idea, because her mother had been her best friend. And when she died, she had never revealed that she had given up a child. And so DNA revealed the whole thing. And now they're very close, but she needed time to process. And process time is something everybody needs. And often when we're the ones who discover something, we get the time to process. And sometimes people expect others that we throw this at are going to process it right away. That's just usually not the case. So you want to make sure that you do everything you can to respect the person's time to process the whole information. So thank you very much for that question. Good luck with that, Lance. David, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Absolutely.
All right, that's our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, thanks to CeCe Moore, of course, the DNA detective, for coming on and talking about fertility fraud. It is rampant in the United States. If you missed any of the show or you want to catch it again, of course, catch the podcast on ExtremeGenes.com, Apple Media, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. We are all over the place. Talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.